The California sun beat down on the suburban streets of Oceanside as I guided my Honda Civic through identical cookie-cutter houses. Each lawn was perfectly manicured. Each driveway hosted SUVs that screamed middle-class success. It was a world away from the steel decks of USS Freedom, where I'd spent the last 8 months commanding 300 sailors through the Mediterranean. My name is Captain Sarah Mitchell, United States Navy. I'm 34 years old, and today I was driving toward what should have been a celebration, but felt more like walking into enemy territory. The birthday party was for my nephew Tyler, turning 16. I'd managed to get shore leave specifically for this occasion, something that required moving heaven and earth with my executive officer. In my world, missing operational tempo for personal reasons wasn't encouraged, but family was family, or so I'd thought. As I turned onto Maple Street, the first red flag appeared. Stretched across the front yard was a massive, happy 16th birthday Tyler. Sign festooned with balloons and streamers. The sign listed everyone expected. Love from Mom, Dad, Grandma Margaret, Uncle Tom, Aunt Jennifer, and the kids. My name was nowhere to be found. It was as if Captain Sarah Mitchell didn't exist, as if the woman who'd spent the last decade serving her country was a footnote too insignificant to mention. I pulled into the driveway behind a gleaming BMW SUV that probably cost more than I made in 6 months. While I'd been living in a 10-by-12-foot stateroom aboard a destroyer, my family had been upgrading their suburban paradise. The front door opened, and my sister Lisa emerged. She was perfectly put together in expensive athleisure that had never seen an actual gym. Her smile was practiced, polite, and about as warm as a January morning in the North Atlantic. "Oh," she said, and that single syllable contained volumes. "You actually came. Not Sarah, I'm so glad you're here." Just surprised acknowledgement of my existence, as if my attendance was some mild inconvenience she hadn't prepared for. "Of course I came," I replied, grabbing my carefully wrapped gift. "I said I would be here." Lisa's gaze swept over me with critical assessment. I was wearing civilian clothes, dark jeans, white blouse, flats, but I could feel her disapproval radiating like heat from asphalt. Maybe it was my unconscious military bearing. Maybe it was just that I was here at all, disrupting their perfect family tableau. "Well, come on in then," she said, stepping aside without offering help. "Everyone's in the backyard. Tyler's been asking about you." The way she said it made it sound like Tyler had been asking about some distant relative nobody talked about anymore. The black sheep aunt who showed up occasionally to disrupt family harmony. Following her through the house, I noticed everything screamed suburban success. Granite countertops, stainless steel appliances, family photos covering every surface. But passing the main hallway, something made my chest tighten. Displayed like trophies were framed photos of every family milestone from the past 5 years. Lisa's wedding, Tom's promotion, Tyler's achievements, my mother Margaret's retirement party. Even the family dog had more representation than I did. I was nowhere, not a single photo from my Naval Academy graduation, nothing from my commissioning ceremony, no picture from assuming command of USS Freedom. The last 15 years of my life had been carefully edited out of the family narrative. Lisa noticed me looking. "Oh, you know how it is," she said with a casual shrug. "We don't really have any recent photos of you. You're always away." Away. That's what they called it when I was deployed to the Persian Gulf, ensuring freedom of navigation. Away when conducting anti-piracy operations off the Horn of Africa. Away when representing American naval power in exercises that kept allies strong and enemies guessing. The sound of laughter from the backyard grew louder. Lisa gestured toward sliding glass doors. "Everyone's out there," she said. "Mom's been asking where you've been all day. Through the glass, I could see the gathering. Adults clustered around the outdoor kitchen with drinks, teenagers near the pool, younger kids running on the lawn. Picture-perfect family bliss. And I was about to walk into it like a square peg being forced into a round hole. "Sarah," Lisa said, hand on the door handle, "just so you know, we've set up the seating arrangements already. I hope you don't mind, but we put you." She paused, choosing words carefully. "We thought you'd be more comfortable with the younger crowd." The way she said it sent a chill down my spine. As she opened the door and the sounds of family celebration washed over us, I realized this wasn't going to be the warm homecoming I'd foolishly hoped for. This was going to be a battlefield where my own family had already decided which side I belonged on. The sliding door opened, and I stepped into what felt like a carefully orchestrated performance of suburban perfection. The backyard was transformed with string lights and an elaborate dessert table. But it was the seating arrangement that hit me like a torpedo to the hull. There, tucked away in the corner near the pool house, sat a small round table clearly meant for children. Plastic chairs in primary colors surrounded it, complete with juice boxes and cartoon-decorated paper plates. And there, looking mortified, sat my 16-year-old nephew Tyler alongside his younger cousins. Tyler's face flushed red when he saw me approaching. "Mom," he called to Lisa, his voice cracking with embarrassment. "Why is Aunt Sarah sitting with us? She's not a kid." Lisa's laugh was like breaking glass. "Oh, Tyler, your aunt doesn't mind. She doesn't have the same responsibilities as the adults. No mortgage, no children to worry about. It's actually perfect for her." Every eye in the backyard turned toward us. The adult table sat prominently on the main deck, housing the real family. My mother Margaret held court at the head, her silver hair perfectly styled and her disapproving gaze already fixed on me. My brother Tom lounged with casual confidence beside his wife Jennifer. "Sarah," Margaret's voice carried across the yard with the enthusiasm of someone greeting an unexpected pest. "There you are. We were beginning to think you'd changed your mind." Again. The word again hung in the air like smoke from a misfired weapon, a reference to missed family gatherings when my ship was deployed. To them, these weren't critical national security missions. They were simply more evidence of my inability to prioritize what really mattered. I settled into the plastic chair designed for someone half my size. My knees bumped the table edge as I tried to find a dignified position. Here I was, a woman who commanded a billion-dollar warship and 300 souls, being seated like Tyler's peer instead of his aunt. Tom raised his beer in a mock toast. "Look at that, everyone. Sarah made it to another family gathering. Mark your calendars, this might be a record." The laughter that followed felt like small arms fire. Each chuckle was a reminder that in their eyes, I was the family failure who'd chosen uncertainty over the safe path of marriage and motherhood. "So, Sarah," Jennifer chimed in, her voice dripping with false concern, "are you still playing Navy? When are you going to settle down and find a real career? Something stable? Playing Navy. As if my 15 years of service was some elaborate game I'd been indulging in. As if the sleepless nights navigating hostile waters was just an extended phase I'd eventually outgrow." "I wouldn't call it playing," I said, my voice carefully controlled. "It's actually quite serious work." Margaret waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, we know you take it seriously, dear, but you're 34 years old. Your biological clock is ticking. Don't you want children, a family of your own?" There it was, the fundamental assumption that poisoned every family gathering. The belief that a woman's worth was measured solely by her ability to produce offspring, that my achievements meant nothing without a husband and children as proof of success. Tyler shifted uncomfortably beside me. "Aunt Sarah," he said quietly, "what kind of work do you do exactly? I mean, I know you're in the Navy, but what do you actually do?" Before I could answer, Tom jumped in with a booming laugh. She pushes papers around on some base in San Diego. Probably processes paperwork for the real sailors who do the actual fighting. The casual dismissal hit harder than a direct insult. Tom had no understanding of what it meant to command at sea, but he spoke with the absolute confidence of a man who'd never had to prove himself beyond suburban comfort. "That's not," I started, but Margaret cut me off. "The important thing is that you're here now," she said, her tone suggesting this was magnanimous. "Even if you can't stay long, you never can you? Always rushing off to some urgent military thing." Lisa began distributing food, pointedly serving the adult table first while we waited like an afterthought. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. This wasn't about seating arrangements. This was about hierarchy, about who mattered and who didn't. As I watched my family laugh and chat at their elevated position, I felt the familiar weight of isolation. I'd earned the respect of admirals and loyalty of my crew through competence and leadership. But here, I was just Sarah, the spinster aunt who'd made questionable life choices. Tyler leaned closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "Aunt Sarah, can I ask you something? When you're away, what's it really like?" I looked into his eyes and saw something unexpected. Genuine curiosity, real interest. For the first time since arriving, someone in my family was asking about my life not to judge it, but to understand it. "It's complicated," I said softly, aware that every word was being monitored by the adult table. "But maybe we can talk about it later, when there's less." I gestured vaguely at the crowd. "Less family around." Tyler grinned, and for a moment I saw a spark of understanding that gave me hope. Perhaps this battlefield had one unexpected ally after all. That spark of understanding in Tyler's eyes didn't fade. Instead, it seemed to kindle something deeper. He glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then leaned closer. "Aunt Sarah," he said quietly, "can I tell you something? I'm supposed to write this essay for AP English about someone who inspires me. Mom keeps saying I should write about Dad's promotion to regional manager, but..." He trailed off, looking embarrassed. "But what?" I prompted gently. "That's not really inspiring, is it? I mean, he sells insurance. That's fine, but it's not like what you do, whatever that actually is." Before I could respond, the conversation at the adult table grew louder. Margaret was holding court, regaling the relatives with tales of social achievements. "And Jennifer's promotion at the bank," Margaret was saying, beaming at Tom's wife, "assistant branch manager at 32. Now that's what I call success. Real responsibility, real impact on the community." Jennifer preened under the praise, shooting a meaningful glance toward our corner table. "It's so important to have goals to build something meaningful. Not everyone understands that." The pointed nature of her comment wasn't lost on anyone. I felt Tyler tense beside me, his jaw tightening with adolescent indignation. "You know what I don't understand?" Tom chimed in, his voice carrying the confidence that comes from 3 beers. "Why Sarah never talks about her work. If you're doing something important, wouldn't you want to share it with family?" Lisa nodded sagely. "She's so secretive about everything. Makes you wonder if there's really much to talk about." The words hit like depth charges. They weren't just questioning my career. They were questioning my integrity, my right to privacy about work that was often classified. Tyler's hand clenched into a fist. "That's not fair," he muttered under his breath. "What's not fair, sweetheart?" Margaret called out. Tyler straightened, and for a moment I saw a flash of something that reminded me of my father. The same stubborn set to his jaw, the same unwillingness to back down. "Nothing, Grandma," he said finally, but his eyes met mine with a look that said everything. He was choosing sides. The moment was interrupted by the arrival of food. Lisa distributed plates efficiently, but the portions told their own story. The adult table received heaping servings of barbecued ribs and gourmet potato salad. Our table got hot dogs cut into sections, mac and cheese from a box, and juice boxes. Even the food was an insult. As I unwrapped my hot dog, Tyler leaned over again. "Is it true what Dad said? Do you really just push papers?" I looked at this 16-year-old boy, this unexpected ally, and realized he deserved better than the lies his parents told themselves about my life. "Tyler," I said quietly, "do you know what a destroyer is?" His eyes widened slightly. "Like a Navy ship." "Exactly, the USS Freedom. She's 509 feet long, displaces about 9,000 tons, and carries a crew of 300 sailors." I paused, watching his expression change from curiosity to awe. "I'm her commanding officer." The hot dog in Tyler's hand stopped halfway to his mouth. "You mean, you're the captain, like the actual captain of a warship?" "I mean exactly that." For a moment, the backyard party faded away. All of it became background noise to the wonder in my nephew's eyes. "That's incredible. You command 300 people. 300 of the finest sailors in the United States Navy," I confirmed. Tyler set down his hot dog completely. "And they just think you push papers." I glanced toward the adult table where my family continued their celebration of ordinary achievements, completely oblivious to the fact that they were dismissing someone who held life and death responsibility for hundreds of people. "They think what they need to think," I said simply. Tyler was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a new kind of respect. "Aunt Sarah, would you maybe let me interview you for my essay?" I smiled, feeling something warm unfold in my chest for the first time since I'd arrived. "I'd be honored, Tyler." For the first time in years, someone in my family was looking at me not as the spinster aunt who'd made questionable life choices, but as someone worthy of respect. It was a start. That moment of connection with Tyler stayed with me as the afternoon dragged on, but it also brought back memories I'd buried deep. Watching him struggle to understand what real inspiration meant reminded me of another 16-year-old who'd once sat in a similar position, trying to figure out what kind of life was worth living. Me, 20 years ago, sitting across from my father in his study. Captain James Mitchell, USN retired, had been everything Tyler was searching for in a hero. Not because he'd commanded destroyers in the Gulf War, though he had, but because he'd understood something fundamental about service that the rest of my family never grasped. I could still see him clearly, sitting behind his old oak desk with ship models and framed commendations. The afternoon sun had streamed through windows, casting shadows across nautical charts he kept in brass tubes. Unlike the sterile perfection of Tom's insurance office or Lisa's suburban showroom house, Dad's study had felt lived in, meaningful. "Sarah," he'd said that day, looking up from the Naval Academy application I'd placed in front of him, "are you sure about this? It's not an easy life, especially for a woman." It was 2004, and women in the Navy were still fighting for equal recognition, still proving themselves in ways their male counterparts never had to. "I'm sure," I'd said, my voice cracking with teenage determination. "I want to serve. I want to make a difference." He'd been quiet for a long moment, studying me with those same intense blue eyes Tyler had inherited. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of 3 decades in uniform. "Service isn't about glory, kiddo. It's about showing up when people need you, even when they don't know they need you. It's about making decisions that keep people safe, even when those decisions cost you personally." He'd paused, glancing at a framed photo of his old ship, the USS Princeton. "Your mother doesn't understand it. Your siblings won't understand it. They'll see the deployments, the missed holidays, the long silences when you can't talk about where you've been. They'll think you're choosing the Navy over family." "Aren't I?" I'd asked, suddenly uncertain. "No," he'd said firmly. "You're choosing to serve something bigger than yourself. That's not abandonment. That's nobility, but not everyone will see it that way. Those words had proven prophetic. Over the years, as I'd risen through the ranks, as I'd deployed to increasingly dangerous waters, my family's understanding had diminished rather than grown. Each promotion felt less like an achievement to share and more like another barrier between us. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now sitting at a children's table while commanding one of the most advanced warships in the world. Dad would have found that simultaneously heartbreaking and grimly amusing. He died 3 years into my first command tour while I was deployed to the Arabian Gulf. I'd gotten the call from Margaret in the middle of the night, her voice distant and formal over the satellite phone. "Your father had a heart attack," she'd said, no preamble. "The funeral is Thursday. I assume you can't make it." The assumption had cut deeper than the news itself. She hadn't even asked if I could come home. She'd simply decided that my duty was somehow less important than family obligation. I'd made it to the funeral, pulling strings to get emergency leave. But the service had felt like a performance where I was an unwelcome understudy. Margaret had spoken about Dad's devotion to family. Tom had shared fishing stories. Lisa had tearfully recounted his pride in her wedding, her children, her domestic accomplishments. No one mentioned his Navy career. No one talked about the lives he'd saved or the missions he'd completed. No one acknowledged that the man they were eulogizing had spent his adult life in service to something greater than suburban comfort. It was as if they'd buried half of who he was and decided to remember only the parts that fit their narrative. Sitting here now, watching Tyler struggle with the same questions about purpose and meaning that I'd grappled with at his age, I realized that Dad's legacy lived on in ways my family couldn't see. It lived in the decisions I made at 0300 hours, when my ship was the only thing standing between a hostile submarine and an Allied convoy. It lived in the young sailors I mentored, the way he'd mentored me. Tyler deserved to know that story. He deserved to understand that there were different kinds of success, different definitions of a life well lived. Maybe that understanding would help him see past his parents' limited vision of achievement. Maybe, through Tyler, I could finally share the part of Dad's legacy that my family had chosen to forget. The conversation at the adult table continued to swirl around mortgage rates and vacation plans, but I found myself thinking about navigation stars and the steady thrum of engines at sea. 2 different worlds, 2 different measures of what mattered. I knew which one Tyler was ready to explore. The sound of Tyler clearing his throat brought me back to the present. He'd been watching me during my silent reflection, and there was something different in his expression now. Less uncertainty, more determination. "Aunt Sarah," he said quietly, glancing once more toward the adult table to ensure we wouldn't be overheard, "can I ask you something else? Something that might sound weird?" "Nothing sounds weird to me anymore, Tyler. What is it?" He fidgeted with his napkin for a moment before meeting my eyes. "When you're out there on your ship, do you ever feel like you're exactly where you're supposed to be? Like everything just makes sense?" The question hit me like a rogue wave. How could a 16-year-old who'd never been further from shore than Catalina Island understand something so fundamental about naval service? Something that took most sailors years to discover. "Yes," I said simply. "Every single day." That's what I thought. Tyler's voice carried a note of satisfaction, as if I'd confirmed something he'd already suspected. Because when Dad talks about his job, or when Mom talks about hers, they never sound like that. They sound like they're just going through the motions. Before I could respond, a commotion erupted from the adult table. Tom's voice rose above the general chatter, slurred slightly from his afternoon beer consumption. "You know what Sarah's problem is," he announced to the group, apparently having decided our corner was fair game for public commentary. She never learned to compromise, never learned that sometimes you have to give up the fantasy and deal with reality. The words carried across the backyard like a challenge. Every conversation stopped. Even the younger kids by the pool turned to watch what was clearly about to become family theater. Margaret nodded sagely. That's exactly right, Thomas. At some point, everyone has to grow up and accept responsibility. Real responsibility, not playing dress-up in a uniform. Playing dress-up. The phrase hit harder than any physical blow could have. I felt Tyler stiffen beside me, his jaw clenching with the same stubborn determination I'd inherited from Dad. "That's not fair," Tyler said, his voice carrying across the sudden silence with surprising strength for a 16-year-old. "What's not fair, sweetheart?" Lisa asked, her tone suggesting she was prepared to humor her son's misguided loyalty. Tyler stood up from his plastic chair, and for a moment he looked older than his years. "You're talking about Aunt Sarah like she's some kind of failure, but you don't even know what she does." "We know she's in the Navy, honey," Jennifer said with patronizing sweetness. "That's very nice, but—" "She's a ship captain," Tyler interrupted, his voice growing stronger. "She commands 300 people on a destroyer. Do any of you command 300 people?" The silence that followed was deafening. I could see the wheels turning in Tom's beer-fogged brain trying to process this information. Margaret's face went through a series of expressions, from confusion to disbelief to something that might have been embarrassment. "That's—" Tom started, then stopped. "I mean, that's not. That's what, Dad?" Tyler pressed. "Not real responsibility, not important." Lisa looked stricken, as if she was seeing her son clearly for the first time. "Tyler, we didn't mean—" "Yes, you did," Tyler said firmly. "You meant exactly what you said, but you're wrong." He turned to face me, and the pride in his eyes was almost overwhelming. "Aunt Sarah, would you tell them about your ship, about what you actually do?" Every eye in the backyard was on me now. The adults looked uncomfortable, caught between embarrassment and skepticism. The teenagers by the pool had gathered closer, drawn by the unusual drama of a family confrontation. Even the smaller children had stopped their games to watch. This was the moment. The choice between maintaining the peace by staying silent or speaking the truth that my family had spent years avoiding. Between protecting their comfortable ignorance or claiming the respect I'd earned through 15 years of service. Tyler was still standing, still watching me with that mixture of hope and determination that reminded me so much of Dad. He'd taken his stand. Now it was time for me to take mine. I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of my decision settle around me like the authority of command. When I spoke, my voice carried the same quiet confidence I used on the bridge during high-stakes operations. "Actually," I said, looking directly at Tom, "I think it's time we had that conversation." The battle lines were drawn. And this time, I wasn't going to retreat. The silence that followed my words was the kind you feel in your bones. Not the comfortable quiet of a peaceful afternoon, but the charged stillness that comes before a storm breaks. I could see Tom's face cycling through emotions, surprise, confusion, and then something that looked suspiciously like fear. "Sarah," Margaret said, her voice carrying the warning tone she'd perfected during my teenage years, "perhaps we should keep this light. It's Tyler's birthday, after all." But Tyler wasn't having it. "No, Grandma, I want to hear this." He remained standing beside me, a teenage soldier holding the line. The solidarity meant more to me than any medal I'd ever received. "Well," Tom said, his earlier bravado deflating like a punctured balloon, "I mean, we know you're in the Navy. That's great. But let's be realistic about what that actually means." "What do you think it means, Tom?" I asked, my voice level and professional. On the bridge, I'd learned that the quieter you spoke during a crisis, the more attention people paid. "Look, I'm not trying to diminish what you do," Tom backpedaled. "But you're basically a government employee with a pension plan. It's steady work, sure, but it's not like you're running a business or building something that lasts." Jennifer nodded in agreement. "And the constant moving around, never settling down. When do you get to have a real life? A real life?" As if the 15 years I'd spent defending their right to have backyard barbecues wasn't real. As if the nights I'd spent navigating through hostile waters so they could sleep peacefully somehow didn't count. "Tell me about your ship, Aunt Sarah," Tyler said suddenly, his voice cutting through the adult condescension. "What's it called?" I looked at him, this unexpected ally who was giving me the opening I needed. "USS Freedom, DDG 105. She's an Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer." Guided missiles. One of Tyler's cousins piped up from the pool area, suddenly interested. "Among other things," I confirmed. "She's 509 feet long, displaces 200 tons, and has a crew of 300 sailors. We carry everything from Tomahawk cruise missiles to advanced radar systems that can track targets hundreds of miles away." Tom's expression was shifting from dismissive to uncertain. You actually work on the missiles." "I don't work on them, Tom. I command them. I command the ship, the crew, and every weapons system aboard her." The words hung in the air like smoke from fired guns. I could see the mental recalculation happening around the table as my family tried to reconcile their image of me with the reality of what I actually did. "That's..." Lisa started, then stopped. "I mean, that sounds dangerous." "It can be," I said simply. "Last year, we intercepted a North Korean vessel trying to smuggle weapons to terrorist organizations. The year before that, we provided escort protection for humanitarian aid ships in the Red Sea while pirates were actively operating in the area." Tyler's eyes were wide with fascination. "Did you have to fight them, the pirates?" "We didn't have to fire on them. Our presence was enough of a deterrent, but we were prepared to do whatever was necessary to protect innocent lives." Margaret cleared her throat, clearly uncomfortable. "Well, that all sounds very dramatic, but surely most of your time is spent doing more mundane things." She was fishing for a way to minimize what I just told them, to reduce it back to something manageable and dismissible. "You're right," I said. "Most of our time is spent training, maintaining equipment, and conducting routine patrols. But that's what allows us to be ready when dramatic situations arise." Tom was looking increasingly uncomfortable. "I didn't realize. I mean, nobody ever talks about." "About what, Dad?" Tyler pressed. "About the fact that Aunt Sarah has one of the most important jobs in the country. About the fact that while you're selling insurance policies, she's protecting American interests around the world." "Tyler," Lisa warned, "don't be disrespectful to your father." "I'm not being disrespectful," Tyler shot back. "I'm being honest. We sit around talking about who got promoted to assistant manager, but we never talk about the fact that Aunt Sarah commands a warship. How is that not the most interesting thing about our family?" The question hung in the air, unanswered and unanswerable. Because the truth was, they'd never talked about it because it didn't fit their narrative. It didn't support their belief that success was measured in suburban achievements and conventional milestones. Margaret set down her wine glass with the precise control of someone trying to regain authority over a situation spiraling beyond her control. "I think," she said with forced calm, "we should change the subject. This is supposed to be a celebration." But Tyler wasn't finished. He turned to me with the intensity of someone who'd finally found the missing piece of a puzzle he'd been trying to solve his whole life. "Aunt Sarah," he said, "would you tell me more about what it's really like out there?" The question was simple, but I could see in his eyes that he was asking for something much deeper. He wasn't just curious about my job. He was searching for proof that there were other ways to live, other definitions of success, other paths than the one his parents had mapped out for him. And suddenly, I knew exactly what I was going to do next. Before I could answer Tyler's question, my phone buzzed against my hip. The sound cut through the backyard tension like a klaxon on the bridge. I glanced at the caller ID and felt my pulse quicken. Commander Rodriguez, my executive officer aboard USS Freedom. "Excuse me," I said, stepping away from the table. "I need to take this." The adults exchanged glances that clearly said typical Sarah, always running away. But Tyler watched me with keen interest as I moved toward the garden gate for privacy. "Captain Mitchell," I answered, my voice automatically shifting to command mode. "Ma'am, sorry to interrupt your leave." Rodriguez's crisp voice came through clearly. "We've received new orders. The Freedom is being tasked for immediate deployment to the eastern Mediterranean. Situations developing rapidly." My mind immediately went into operational planning mode. Timeline. "We need all senior staff back aboard by 0800 tomorrow. Full crew recall by 1200. 48 hours of shore leave, cut to less than 18. It happened more often than my family knew." "Understood. I'll be there by 0600. What's the nature of the deployment?" "Can't discuss details over an unsecured line, ma'am, but it's connected to potential hostile action against Allied shipping lanes. Admiral Patterson specifically requested our ship for this mission." Despite the gravity of the situation, I felt a surge of professional pride. When the Navy needed a job done right, they called Freedom. They called me. "I'll see you in the morning, Zoe. Start the recall procedures." "Aye, aye, Captain." I ended the call and stood for a moment in the garden, letting the weight of responsibility settle over me. Somewhere in the Mediterranean, a situation was developing that could affect global shipping, possibly even American lives. When I turned back toward the party, I found Tyler standing just a few feet away. He'd followed me and had obviously heard enough to understand its significance. "You have to go," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, tomorrow morning early, because of whatever's happening over there." I looked at this 16-year-old who'd been asking about inspiration and real purpose. Here it was, standing right in front of him. "Tyler, when something threatens international shipping lanes, when American allies need protection, that's when they call ships like Freedom. That's when they call officers like me." His eyes were wide, processing what he'd just witnessed. "So right now, while we're standing here arguing about birthday cake, there are people somewhere who might need your help." "Exactly. And you'll just leave everything here and go, without hesitation." Tyler was quiet for a moment, working through the implications. This wasn't theoretical anymore. This was real. The phone call, the urgency, the immediate shift from family gathering to military operation. "That's incredible," he said finally. "It's also why your grandmother thinks I can't have a real life," I said. "Why your parents think I'm choosing work over family, because when that phone rings, everything else becomes secondary." "But it's not really work, is it?" Tyler asked. "It's more than that. Much more than that." We walked back toward the party together. The adults were still sitting around the table, their conversation having moved on to homeowners association fees. As we approached, Margaret looked up with an expression that managed to be both worried and annoyed. "Everything all right, dear? Another one of your military emergencies?" The dismissive tone grated against my nerves. "Actually, yes, I'll need to leave early tomorrow morning." "Of course you will," Tom said, shaking his head. "Can't even stay for a full family weekend." Lisa sighed dramatically. "Tyler's only going to turn 16 once, Sarah." But Tyler surprised everyone by speaking up. "It's okay, Mom. Aunt Sarah has important work to do. People are counting on her." The adults looked at him with varying degrees of confusion and mild irritation, but Tyler kept his gaze fixed on me with something that looked remarkably like pride. "Well," Margaret said, I suppose we should be grateful you made it this far into the celebration. I was about to respond when Tyler stepped closer to me, his voice carrying a new kind of respect. "Aunt Sarah," he said loud enough for everyone to hear, "would it be okay if I called you sometime? When you're back from your deployment, I'd really like to learn more about what you do." The question hung in the air like a challenge to everything his parents had taught him about success and priorities. And for the first time since I'd arrived, I felt like I'd actually accomplished something important. That moment of triumph was short-lived. I could see the wheels turning in Margaret's head, the way her eyes narrowed as she processed what had just happened. Tyler's public declaration was a direct challenge to the family's carefully constructed narrative. Margaret set down her wine glass with the precise control of someone preparing for battle. "Tyler, sweetheart, why don't you go get the birthday cake from the kitchen?" It wasn't a suggestion. Tyler obediently headed toward the house. As soon as he was out of earshot, Margaret's mask slipped away entirely. "Sarah," she began, her voice carrying the authoritative tone she'd used to manage family crises for decades, "I think it's time we had a serious conversation." Lisa immediately moved her chair closer, forming a united front. "We've been patient, Sarah, but this has gone too far." "What exactly has gone too far?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "Filling that boy's head with romantic notions about military life," Margaret said. "He's at a crucial age, making decisions about his future, and you're glamorizing a lifestyle that's completely inappropriate for someone with his advantages." Tom leaned forward. "She's right, Sarah. Tyler could go to any college, pursue any career. Why would you want him to waste that potential playing soldier?" Playing soldier, as if my 15 years of service were some elaborate game of dress-up. I answered his questions honestly. I said carefully, "Honestly." Lisa's voice rose with incredulity. "You made it sound like some adventure. You didn't tell him about the isolation, the constant moving, the way it destroys relationships. You didn't tell him that you're 34 years old and completely alone." The words hit their intended target with surgical precision. Margaret nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the point. You're 34, and what do you have to show for it? No husband, no children, no real home. You're wasting your life playing dress-up in a uniform when you should be building something meaningful." "My service is meaningful," I said, hearing the defensiveness creep into my voice. "To whom?" Margaret shot back. "To politicians. What about family? What about legacy?" Jennifer joined the attack. "Sarah, look at yourself honestly. You're living in government housing, following orders, completely dependent on an institution that will discard you when you're no longer useful. That's not independence, that's institutionalization." She'd taken my pride in military service and reframed it as psychological dependence. "And what kind of role model is that for Tyler?" Lisa pressed. "He needs to see what a successful woman looks like. Someone who can balance career and family, someone who understands that real achievement means building something that lasts." "Like your dental office management?" I asked, sarcasm slipping out. Lisa's face flushed red. "At least I have a life outside of work. At least I have people who depend on me for more than just taking orders." Margaret intervened smoothly. "This is about helping Sarah see that she's reached a crossroads. She can continue down this path of isolation, or she can make changes while there's still time." "What kind of changes?" I asked, dreading the answer. Margaret's smile was razor sharp. "You could request a transfer to a desk job here in California. Something stable, with regular hours. It would give you time to focus on what really matters. Finding a good man, starting a family." Tom nodded enthusiastically. "There are plenty of successful guys in our circle who would be interested in someone with your background. Once you softened it up a bit, of course. Men don't want to feel like they're competing with the military for their wife's attention. They were asking me to abandon my command, my crew, my entire identity." What about Tyler? I asked. Shouldn't he know there are different ways to serve, different definitions of success? Tyler needs to focus on real success, Margaret said firmly. Harvard, Yale, Stanford. A career that builds wealth and status, not one that serves other people's agendas. Lisa leaned forward. Sarah, we're family, we love you, but the truth is that you're hiding from real life behind this military fantasy. It's time to grow up. I looked around the table at these women who claimed to love me while systematically dismantling everything I valued. They weren't trying to understand my choices, they were trying to erase them. You think I'm hiding, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. Aren't you? Margaret challenged. When was the last time you had a real relationship? You've built this elaborate escape from adult responsibility, and now you want to drag Tyler into it. I stood up slowly, feeling something fundamental shift inside me. The patient, accommodating daughter was gone, replaced by the commanding officer who'd earned her rank through competence and courage. You're right about one thing, I said, my voice carrying the authority that had guided my ship through hostile waters. It is time to tell hard truths. The battle lines were drawn, and this time I was ready to fight back. The silence that followed my words was different from any that had come before. This wasn't uncomfortable family tension or shocked stillness. This was the profound hush that falls over a bridge when the commanding officer is about to give orders that will change everything. Margaret's face had gone pale, but her chin lifted with stubborn defiance. She wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by the daughter she'd spent decades trying to reshape. Sarah, she began, but I held up a hand, the same gesture I used to silence unnecessary chatter during critical operations. No, I said, my voice calm but carrying unmistakable authority. You've had your say, now it's my turn. I looked around the table at these three women who thought they knew me, who had spent the afternoon dissecting my life like amateur psychologists. You want to talk about hard truths? Let's start with this one. You have no idea what I do, none of you. You think commanding a warship is playing soldier because you can't conceive of responsibility that extends beyond your suburban bubble. Tom started to interrupt, but I turned my gaze on him with the same intensity I'd used to stare down hostile vessels in international waters. Tom, you sell insurance. You protect people's cars from accidents that might happen. I protect American citizens from enemies who are actively trying to kill them. Which one of us is dealing with reality? The question hung in the air unanswered because there was no good answer. And Lisa, I continued, you manage a dental office. You coordinate appointments and handle billing. I coordinate 300 sailors and manage weapons systems worth more than this entire neighborhood. Tell me again about building something that lasts. Lisa's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. She'd never seen this version of me, the officer who'd earned respect through competence. You want to know what I've built? I asked, my voice growing stronger. I've built a reputation for excellence that reaches the highest levels of naval command. When there's a crisis anywhere in the world, when American interests are threatened, they call me. Not because I'm someone's daughter or wife, but because I'm the best at what I do. Margaret found her voice, though it carried less certainty. That's all very impressive, dear, but what happens when you're too old to command? What happens to any of us when we're no longer needed? I countered. The difference is that when I retire, I'll have a legacy that matters. I'll have trained officers who will command their own ships. I'll have protected trade routes that keep the global economy functioning. What legacy will you leave? The question hit home. They'd spent so much energy convincing themselves that their conventional choices were superior that they'd never considered what those choices actually added up to. Jennifer finally spoke up. But Sarah, don't you want someone to share your life with? Don't you want to be loved? It was the most honest question any of them had asked all day. "I am loved," I said simply. "I'm loved by every sailor who served under my command and knows I'd put their safety before my career. I'm loved by the families who trust me to bring their sons and daughters home safely. I'm loved by a country that sleeps peacefully because people like me stand watch." I paused, letting that sink in before delivering the final blow. The question isn't whether I'm loved. The question is whether I'm loved for who I really am or for who someone wants me to become. Margaret's wine glass sat forgotten, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The intervention hadn't gone as planned. Instead of breaking me down, it had forced me to articulate exactly why I'd chosen my path. But I wasn't finished. I looked toward the house where Tyler was presumably still retrieving cake and made a decision that would change everything. "There's something else you need to know," I said, pulling out my phone. "Something that might help you understand exactly what kind of responsibility I carry." The real battle was about to begin. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I needed. Commander Rodriguez answered on the second ring, his voice crisp despite the late hour on the West Coast. "Captain Mitchell, is everything all right, ma'am?" "Zoe, I need a favor," I said, putting the phone on speaker so my family could hear every word. "Is the crew still aboard for the recall briefing?" "Yes, ma'am. Most of senior staff and about 200 crew members are here preparing for tomorrow's deployment. We're conducting final systems checks." Margaret's eyes widened as she began to understand that this wasn't some elaborate bluff. This was real military communication, happening in real time. "Rodriguez, I'm here with my family at my nephew's 16th birthday party. They've been asking about what we do aboard Freedom. Would it be possible to arrange a brief video call with some of the crew? The birthday boy would appreciate it." There was a pause, and I could almost hear Rodriguez's smile through the phone. "Ma'am, that would be our honor. Give me 5 minutes to set up the connection and get the crew ready." "Outstanding. Thank you, Zoe." I ended the call and looked around the table. The adults were staring at me with expressions ranging from confusion to dawning amazement. They were finally beginning to grasp that when I said I commanded a ship, I meant I actually commanded a ship with real people who followed my orders. "Sarah," Margaret began hesitantly, "what exactly are you?" "You wanted to know what my life is really like," I interrupted. "You wanted to understand what I do. In about 5 minutes, you're going to meet 300 of the finest sailors in the United States Navy, and they're going to wish Tyler a happy birthday." Just then, Tyler emerged from the house carrying an elaborate birthday cake, complete with 16 candles. His timing couldn't have been more perfect. "Sorry that took so long," he said, setting the cake on the table. "I had trouble lighting all the candles and—" He stopped mid-sentence, noticing the charged atmosphere. "What's going on?" "Your Aunt Sarah has arranged something special for your birthday," Lisa said, her voice carrying a note of uncertainty she couldn't quite hide. My phone rang, and I saw Rodriguez's contact information on the screen. "Here we go," I said, answering the call, and immediately switching to video mode. The screen filled with the image of USS Freedom's bridge, and my heart swelled with pride. There, in their crisp Navy uniforms, stood what looked like half my crew. Rodriguez was front and center, flanked by my department heads and senior petty officers. Behind them, I could see more sailors filling every available space on the bridge. "Good evening, Captain," Rodriguez said with a sharp salute that was immediately echoed by every sailor visible on screen. "USS Freedom, ready to wish Tyler a happy birthday, ma'am." The effect on my family was instantaneous and electric. Tom's jaw dropped. Lisa's hand flew to her mouth. Margaret actually gasped audibly. And Tyler's face lit up with a wonder I hadn't seen since he was a small child discovering something magical. "Freedom crew," I said, my voice carrying the command authority that these sailors knew and respected. I'd like you to meet my nephew Tyler, who's turning 16 today. Tyler, say hello to the crew of USS Freedom." Tyler stepped forward, his teenage awkwardness replaced by genuine awe. Wow, hello everyone. A chorus of "Happy birthday, Tyler" rang out from the screen, followed by enthusiastic applause. But Rodriguez wasn't finished. "Tyler, your aunt didn't just arrange this call," Rodriguez said, his voice carrying across the backyard with crystal clarity. "She's the commanding officer of this ship, and 312 souls aboard her. She's the finest captain I've ever served under, and it's an honor to wish you a happy birthday on behalf of her crew." The camera panned slightly, showing more of the bridge, and I could see sailors holding up a hastily made banner that read, "Happy 16th birthday, Tyler, from USS Freedom DDG 105. But the moment that truly silenced my family came when Chief Petty Officer Martinez stepped forward. He was a 20-year veteran with combat ribbons covering his chest, a man who'd seen action in 3 different theaters of operation. "Sir," he said, addressing Tyler with the same respect he'd show any civilian, "your aunt saved my life and the lives of my shipmates during a storm in the South China Sea last year. When everyone else wanted to turn back, Captain Mitchell held course and got us through safely. She's not just our commanding officer. She's someone we'd follow anywhere." The words hung in the digital air between California and wherever Freedom was moored. This wasn't a staged demonstration or a carefully rehearsed presentation. This was genuine respect from professional warriors for their commanding officer. Tyler turned to look at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of pride and amazement. "Aunt Sarah, they really look up to you. And we look up to her," another voice called from the crowd of sailors. "Happy birthday, Tyler." The call continued for another few minutes, with crew members sharing brief stories about deployments, showing Tyler different parts of the ship through the video connection, and answering his increasingly excited questions about naval operations. When we finally ended the call, the backyard fell into absolute silence. But this time, it wasn't the uncomfortable quiet of family tension or the shocked stillness of confrontation. This was the profound silence of people processing something that had fundamentally changed their understanding of reality. Tyler was the first to speak, his voice filled with unmistakable pride. "That was the coolest thing that's ever happened to me." But it was Margaret's reaction that surprised me most. She was staring at me as if seeing me for the first time, her usual mask of disapproval replaced by something that looked remarkably like respect. "Sarah," she said quietly, "I had no idea." The admission hung in the air like a white flag of surrender. For the first time in my adult life, my family was seeing me not as their problem child, but as the woman I'd actually become. The battle was over, and for once I'd won. The silence that followed Margaret's admission stretched for what felt like an eternity. Tyler was still staring at my phone screen even though the call had ended, as if he could will the USS Freedom crew back into view. The adults sat frozen, processing what they'd just witnessed, their entire narrative about my life crumbling in real time. Tom was the first to break the silence, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. "Sarah, we didn't know, we knew you were in the Navy, but commanding an actual warship, 300 people. 312, I corrected quietly. And yes, they trust me with their lives every single day." Lisa looked stricken, her earlier confidence completely evaporated. "When you said you had responsibility, I thought you meant, I don't know, paperwork, administrative stuff, not actual life and death decisions." "Every decision I make affects someone's safety," I said, settling back into my chair. The authority I'd wielded during the confrontation was still there, but softer now, more educational than combative. When we're conducting freedom of navigation operations in contested waters, when we're escorting humanitarian aid through pirate-infested seas, when we're providing missile defense for allied nations, those aren't abstract concepts. Those are real missions with real consequences. Jennifer, who had been notably quiet since the video call, finally spoke up. The man who said you saved his life, Chief Martinez, he meant that literally, didn't he? Last year, we encountered a Category 4 typhoon while en route to assist with disaster relief in the Philippines. I explained. Standard protocol would have been to seek shelter and wait it out. But there were people dying, and every hour we delayed meant more casualties. I made the call to push through the storm. Tyler leaned forward, hanging on every word. What happened? We took a beating. 60-foot waves, winds over 130 knots. The ship rolled 45 degrees, far enough that we thought she might not come back upright. Chief Martinez was leading a damage control team when a massive wave hit us. If we'd lost him and his team, we might have lost the ship. The backyard had become an amphitheater. My family gathered around like students listening to a master class in leadership they'd never imagined possible. "But you got through," Tyler said, and it wasn't a question. "We got through, and we delivered critical supplies that saved hundreds of lives. That's what service means, Tyler. It's not about glory or adventure. It's about being willing to risk everything for people you'll never meet, for principles that matter more than your own comfort." Margaret's voice, when she finally spoke, was barely above a whisper. "All these years, when you missed holidays, when you couldn't come to family events, I was usually deployed somewhere, doing exactly that kind of work," I confirmed. "And every time I called to explain why I couldn't make it, you made me feel like I was choosing my job over family. But I wasn't choosing my job, Mom. I was choosing to honor the oath I took to defend this country." The weight of years of misunderstanding settled over the table like a heavy blanket. Tom ran his hands through his hair, looking genuinely distressed. "Jesus, Sarah, all this time, I thought you were just, I don't know, stubborn, unwilling to settle down. I had no idea you were actually." "Actually what?" I prompted gently. "A hero," Tyler said firmly before any of the adults could respond. "You're actually a hero." The word hung in the air, and I could see my family grappling with a complete recalibration of their understanding. The spinster aunt who'd made poor life choices was gone, replaced by someone they'd never bothered to see clearly. Lisa's eyes filled with tears. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. We've been terrible to you, all of us. You've been operating on incomplete information," I said, surprising myself with how much forgiveness I felt. "I never told you the full scope of what I do because most of it's classified, and honestly because I stopped believing you'd be interested." Margaret looked up sharply. "Classified? The specific details of our missions, our capabilities, our locations. Yes, most of that's classified. When you asked what I did for a living, I couldn't exactly say well. Last month, we intercepted Chinese submarines conducting surveillance on American naval exercises, and next week we're providing ballistic missile defense for Taiwan." Tom's mouth fell open. "You do that? Actually do that? That's Tuesday for us," I said with a slight smile. "Thursday might be anti-piracy operations off Somalia. Friday could be humanitarian assistance after a natural disaster. The USS Freedom goes wherever American interests need protection." Tyler stood up suddenly, his chair scraping against the patio stones. "Dad, Mom, Grandma, do you understand what this means? We've been sitting here all day treating Aunt Sarah like she's some kind of disappointment, and she's literally one of the most important people in the Navy." The teenager's moral clarity cut through the adult confusion like a blade. Out of the mouths of babes, I thought, watching my family finally confront the reality of who I was and what I'd accomplished. Margaret looked at me with something I hadn't seen in her eyes since I was a child, genuine respect. "Sarah," she said slowly, "I owe you the biggest apology of my life. It was a start. After 15 years of feeling like an outsider in my own family, it was finally a start." 3 months later, I stood on the bridge of USS Freedom as we cut through the Mediterranean swells, returning from a successful mission that would never make the evening news. The deployment had gone exactly as planned. No headlines, no drama, just professional excellence executed in the shadows. My phone buzzed with a message from Tyler. It was a photo of him at his high school career day, wearing a crisp Navy rock uniform. The caption read, "Guess what I'm considering for college? Thanks for showing me what real leadership looks like, Aunt Sarah." I smiled, remembering our conversation before I deployed. He'd called with questions about Naval Academy applications and what it really meant to serve. For the first time, someone in my family was asking not to change my mind, but to understand my heart. The changes in my family hadn't been instant or dramatic. Margaret still worried about my unmarried status, but now she framed it differently. "I just want you to be happy, dear," she'd said during our last video call. "And if the Navy makes you happy, then I'm proud of what you've accomplished." Lisa had surprised me most. She'd started following military news, sending me articles about naval operations with messages like, "Is this the kind of thing your ship does?" Her curiosity was genuine, her questions thoughtful. The sister who'd once dismissed my career now bragged to her friends about her war hero sister. Even Tom had come around. His turning point came when he tried to explain my job to his insurance clients and realized he couldn't do it justice. "I sell people protection from things that might happen," he'd told me sheepishly. "You actually protect them from things that are happening." But the real transformation had been in Tyler. The 16-year-old searching for inspiration had found it, and more importantly, found the courage to choose his own path. His essay about personal heroes had earned state-level recognition. He'd written about the aunt who taught him that real strength isn't measured in paychecks, but in willingness to serve something greater than yourself. As I watched the sun set over the Mediterranean, I thought about the journey that brought me here. Not just the geographic journey from California to the middle of the sea, but the longer journey from family disappointment to family pride. I'd learned something important that day at Tyler's birthday party. The people who matter most aren't always the ones who share your DNA. Sometimes they are the sailors who trust you with their lives, the young people you inspire to chase impossible dreams. But family, real family, is worth fighting for. It's worth the patient work of helping people see past their limitations. It's worth showing them who you really are even when you're not sure they're ready to see it. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a group message from my family, something unthinkable 6 months ago. Margaret had sent a photo of the local newspaper's Sunday edition, open to an article about women in military leadership. She'd written, "This reminded me of you, Sarah. Love, Mom." I looked out at the vast expanse of ocean surrounding our ship, at the endless horizon that had called to me since I was young. This was my element, my purpose, my home. But for the first time in 15 years, I felt like I truly had another home waiting, a family that finally saw me for who I was. The bridge was quiet except for the steady hum of engines and soft chatter of routine communications. My officers went about their duties with professional competence that made me proud to serve alongside them. And somewhere in California, a teenager was looking at the stars and dreaming of command at sea, just as his aunt had done 20 years before. Leadership isn't about the title you carry or the respect you demand. It's about the example you set and the lives you touch along the way. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't winning the battle, It's helping others understand what the battle was really about. Finding your own voice in a world that tries to define you isn't easy, but it's always worth the fight. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to honor Vindicated for more stories of resilience and strength. Share your own moments of standing up for who you are in the comments below, because every voice deserves to be heard. Until next time, stay strong and stay true to yourselves.